Good morning to all of you. Let me welcome you to Delhi, to this program organized by the Indian Youth Congress. I'm sure it will give you an opportunity to meet people from other parts of India and try to understand how other parts of India and other people in other parts of India live, work, and interact with each other. This is a vast country. Many of us, while most of us, are, in a sense, trapped in our own little world. The vast majority of people in villages do not travel beyond their district or travel beyond their state. With increasing prosperity, they will perhaps go to neighboring states on pilgrimages. A large number of even urban people don't travel outside their city, don't travel outside their states, and we therefore know very little about each other from direct contact and direct experience. Our information, our knowledge is really second-hand, through the media, through newspapers, through television, through the social media, and through word of mouth. A gathering like this gives you an opportunity to understand, for example, someone from Kerala, to understand how someone from Arunachal Pradesh lives, for someone from Jammu and Kashmir to know what are the problems of Andhra Pradesh. So I compliment the Indian Youth Congress for organizing this Youth Parliament year after year. I believe this was the third year in succession. I compliment the Indian Youth Congress. I know the word Parliament has different resonance at different times. Most people are in awe of Parliament. Parliament is the highest lawmaking body of this country. In the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, we send our elected representatives. They certainly represent all of us, and therefore, in a sense, we are in awe of Parliament. But when we see the actual functioning of Parliament, that awe turns into disappointment and sometimes into despair. For many days, the houses do not function. Many debates turn out to be simply a cacophony of voices. And many bills are passed without a debate. In fact, the most recent example is a Constitution Amendment Bill, which was approved by the Cabinet on the 6th of February evening, introduced and passed in the Lok Sabha on the 7th of February, and introduced and passed in the Rajya Sabha on the 8th of February. Contrast that with the making of the Constitution. It took our founding fathers 3 years to make the Constitution, but we amend the Constitution in less than 3 days. So I think at different times, the word Parliament has a different resonance. Sometimes it's awe, on a few occasions it's admiration, but more often than not, it is utter disappointment and despair. Why is it so? It is so because there's a great churning going on in this country. we are not yet a settled society. There are still historic injustices that have to be cured or healed or repaired. And as long as these injustices are prevalent, the churning will not stop. India is a multicultural society. It is not as though this generation is making it a multicultural society. We've been multicultural for over 2,000 years. Contrast with countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and some European countries which are trying to become multicultural. Take, for example, the case of Australia. Until 20 or 25 years ago, they followed a policy called White Australia. The original inhabitants of Australia were virtually ostracized as Aboriginal. The white settlers and their descendants tried to keep Australia as White Australia. But they realized that in a globalized world, in a competitive world, if you remain a fortress, that those are close to other people, you will not prosper. Therefore, Australia is now actively becoming a multicultural society. So is Canada. And they are proud of their multiculturalism. The United Kingdom has been multicultural for nearly 100 years. The US has been multicultural for 300 years. India has been multicultural for 2,000 years. Christianity came to India 2,000 years ago. Islam came to India about 750 years ago. Zoroastrianism came to India a few centuries ago. Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism were religions which were founded in India as variations of Hinduism. And therefore we have been multicultural. We've always had multiple languages, multiple religions, multiple customs, multiple food habits, multiple dress codes, multiple civil codes, and we've been proud about our multiculturalism. The multiculturalism had its fault lines also. For example, caste was a major fault line and is a major fault line. The question is, will it remain a major fault line in the future? This is a question which every young person should ask herself or himself. We don't quite understand the origins of caste. Why should a system of division of labor degenerate into a system of caste in India alone? Why is there not such differences in other countries? But caste is a reality. It was a reality. It is a reality. The question you should ask yourself is, will it remain a reality for the next few centuries? Caste bred injustice. The so-called intermediate castes didn't have access to education. The so-called untouchable castes didn't have access to even a common drinking well or a common pond or entry to a temple, not to speak of access to education. Those injustices remain today, and you'll be completely wrong if you say those injustices are not there today. If you say that, you're blind. You're refusing to see the reality. Multiculturalism and other social inequalities breed economic inequalities. The economic inequalities in India are formidable, completely unacceptable. In the last few days, the Congress party has been talking about a minimum income guarantee for the poorest of the poor. What does that mean? It means that the bottom 20% of India, which is utterly poor, has to be brought to a level of income where it can have enough food, clothes, a roof over their heads, and access to education and medical care. Is that too much to ask? Is that too much for an individual? Inequalities, on the one hand, there are social inequalities on the other. There is discrimination against women. There is huge discrimination against tribals. There is discrimination between poor children and well-to-do children. There is discrimination and access to education. There is discrimination and access to health care. In Sweden, they proudly say that whether it's the king's daughter or a common man's wife, both deliver their babies in similar hospital rooms. The king's daughter delivers her baby in a hospital room. The average worker's wife also delivers her baby in another similar room. Can we say that about our access to health care, our access to education? So the one thing that I want to impress upon you is, no one among you individually can get rid of all these inequalities and injustices. But each one of you can ask the question and decide for yourself whether you want to be conscious of these inequalities and do something to eliminate these injustices and inequalities, or do you want to be just another person who goes along with the flow and doesn't care about the inequalities and injustices are prevalent in India's society? That's the question you should ask yourself. A question you cannot ask when you're 14 or 15. A question you will not ask when you're 40. At 14 or 15, you're too young to ask the question. At 40, you're too cynical to ask yourself that question. The time to ask the question is now, at your age. What do you want to be? Swami Vivekananda asked this question and turned out to be an ascetic, a wandering minstrel, and a philosopher. Shankaracharya asked this question and decided to travel across the length and breadth of this country, spreading a philosophy that he believed. Jesus Christ asked this question. Siddhartha, who became Buddha, asked this question. Shirdi Sai Baba asked this question. And each one took a path which they thought was a path to improve the quality of life, improve life as such among the people they worked with. I'm certainly not advocating that each one of you become a wandering minstrel or an ascetic. I want you to be part of India, part of the churning in India, but try to make a difference so that the society that we leave behind is less unjust, less unequal. Inequality and injustice will never be eliminated. There will always be some inequality and some injustice. But each one of us can do our best to make sure that inequalities and injustice are reduced? That is the question you should ask yourself. If you ask that question, and you reflect upon it and debate it and talk to people and read, you will find that ultimately it comes to what opportunities are available for economic well-being in this country. President Clinton famously said, "It's the economy is stupid." It's the economy that decides what a country will be, what a people will be. Give a Dalit the economic opportunities, most Dalits will overcome the social inequalities. Give a minority the economic opportunities, most in that minority group will be able to withstand the injustices heaped on minorities. Ultimately, in my view, it boils down to the economy. The state of the economy today is dismal. Simply because we find enough food on our table, our parents have bought us enough clothes to wear and enough shoes to wear, and we have the freedom to travel. It does not mean that all Indians enjoy those freedoms or enjoy those benefits. The question you should ask your government, whichever party, whichever state is, what are you doing? What are you doing to make India's economy prosperous? No country is destined to be poor. It's a completely wrong notion that some countries are fated to be poor. There's no such thing as that. Singapore, 50 years ago, was a fishing village, no different from present-day Chennai. "400 years ago, there was no United States. Little over 100 years ago, what is now Russia and what was earlier Soviet Union did not exist. For the wealth of the world, between China and India, they controlled the wealth of the world. In 1983, China and India were at the same stage of economic development. Per capita of India and per capita of China was the same in 1983. Today, China's economy is 5 times India's economy, and their per capita is almost 5 times India's per capita. So there's no law, there's no immutable law that a country will remain poor. Oh, this is India. We have been poor, we will remain poor. First, you have to banish that defeatist thought from your mind. We are not destined to remain poor. India can become a middle-income country, and India can become a rich country like many other middle-income and many other rich countries. All that we have to do is to unleash the potential and the productive forces that are in every one of the 130 crore Indians. We have to create the opportunities that people can produce more. What is GDP? What is the measure of prosperity of a nation? How much can it produce in terms of goods and services? We produce about 100 million tons of steel. China produces 900 million tons of steel. And our populations are not very different. How can China produce 900 million tons of steel, and why should India produce only 100 million tons of steel and import our steel? We can produce enough food not only for ourselves but to feed several countries of the world. Why has China become the workshop of the world? Well, we can't make the same things. Why is Bangladesh today producing most outer garments of the world? First, you have to banish the thought that this can't be done. Everything can be done as long as you bring science, technology, capital, enterprise. Everything can be done. Let me contrast the two pictures of India. We can put today a satellite in space. We are perhaps one of the 7 or 8 countries with that capacity. We can put a satellite in space. Coca-Cola and Pepsi deliver Coke and Pepsi to the farthest village of India. Yet we can't deliver drinking water to the farthest village. Why? Not because it's rocket science. In fact, we mastered rocket science. We can't master simple sciences. If you can cut a path through space to the moon and to the Mars, why can't you lay roads that connect all the villages and all the towns? And if you can lay roads, why should the road you lay disappear in the first monsoon? Therefore, it's simply a question of governance, a question of determination, a question of bringing science, technology, enterprise, capital and management to the task at hand and completing that task. I want you to reflect on these things and take a few pledges. Firstly, I will try to understand how other people live and work in India, who belong to a different state or a different religion or speak a different language or belong to a different caste. How do they live and work in India? The second pledge is, how can I understand them and they can understand me so that we can live together in a multicultural society? Thirdly, having tried to understand each other, how can we work together to make this a prosperous country? How can we impress upon our elected representatives, don't divide us, unite the people of India so that we can make it a prosperous country? And fourthly, how can we demand of our governments that they bring common sense to the table, bring science, technology, enterprise, capital and management to the table so that we can produce more goods and services? And finally, how can we ensure that the laws and rules of this country ensure that everyone in India shares equitably in the goods and services that we produce? These are the pledges that you should take. And these are the rules that you should make for yourself. And try, in the long years that are ahead of you, to try to live by those rules. And wherever you are, whatever you do, try to see whether you can live largely by those rules so that the world, the society, is a much better place when you leave it than when you inherit it. It's a great opportunity for you to meet with people. Don't become little groups among yourself here. Don't cluster around people who you know. Try to go out and meet others. Try to reach out to people who you have not met. You're here for a couple of days, and a couple of days is good enough opportunity for you to meet people and try to keep in touch with them, write to them, speak to them. Today communication is so easy. and cheap. Therefore, you can make many friends. People from the south must make friends in the north. People from the west must make friends in the east. People who speak different languages must make friends. People who belong to different religions must make friends. And try to remain together, keep in touch with each other, remain in touch with each other, so that you can build a large social group. Who knows? The social group may find opportunities to work together in the future, someday or another. So I'm very happy that IYC has brought you together in this Youth Parliament. I know that you will follow the rules of a mock parliament or a youth parliament and debate issues among yourselves. But in all those debates, the central theme must be, how does a multicultural society become a prosperous and just and equal multicultural society? A multicultural society that perpetuates injustice and inequality is unacceptable. A multicultural society must become prosperous, just and equal, and your generation must lend its shoulder to achieve that goal. Thank you and good wishes to all of you.